Hey there kids, it's not your dad, but your LoreDad, here to procrastinate on a huge video I'm working on by making a different video. I've been working on a very special project, but it's been taking me quite a while to do, so I wanted to make a different video in between this heavy hitter. A while ago, I made a video about how I would have made Kaiserreich, and it had inspired some Führerreich developers to restart the project. They've taken their own direction with the idea, and it's shown to be a great choice, as they totally embraced the Gilded Age of America and having them expand to extreme lengths, with the Civil War nearly guaranteed, as well as some other adjustments to the timeline. Best of luck to you, Kaiserreich. In this video, we're going to see if I'm able to revive another mod. This time, it's a Kaiserreich Cold War, known as Kampf Gegen Barbarei. I hope you enjoy my take on this interesting concept. The lore of the scenario generally follows this outline, if I remember correctly. The Third International in Europe gets defeated by a combined Entente Reichspakt coalition, but due to the prowess of the American Socialists, they expel the Entente from Canada and the West Indies, resulting in a peace which granted Germany Europe and America the Western Hemisphere. Japan was able to make significant gains against the collapsing Americans and the vulnerable Germans, resulting in a co-prosperity sphere that includes a Hawaiian American successor state, the Philippines, several Pacific islands, and major parts of China. This manifests into a tripolar world, where the three superpowers attempt to chip away at each other's presence for world dominance. I'll do a rough revision of this exact dynamic in this scenario later, but for now, I want to focus specifically on the American Socialists, as they managed to get the absolute best outcome imaginable for their conflict. The original lore of the Commonwealth of America had attempted to grant them as many advantages as possible. For example, in the Pacific States of America, farmer labor manages to get elected. After the CSA and PSA managed to defeat the Federalists and the American Union state, Canada attempts to intervene on behalf of their preferred New Englandic candidate. This results in the Social Democratic PSA and the Syndicalist CSA, combining their forces against the Canadians, which ultimately results in the Americans completely overtaking Canada. In original lore, the Commonwealth of America was meant to have a complete and unequivocal hold over the entirety of the continent. However, what I had attempted to introduce was a fragile dynamic between the revolutionary government and the moderate Pacific states. Due to the scenario initially calling for the PSA and CSA to peacefully unite against British imperialism, we're stuck in a situation where the Pacific states would have the internal legacy of a capitalist system, alongside bourgeois democratic elements, such as being able to vote for non-socialist parties. But the CSA was unapologetically revolutionary. Whether they were anarcho-syndicalist or totalist, Eastern America would have been rid of all bourgeois elements through violent takeover, for better and worse, allowing for socialism as Marx had theorized to be implemented. In the original lore, the combination of the PSA and CSA was very clear-cut. The PSA's government would concede their authority to the CSA and integrate themselves into their government. The Syndicalists accept a multi-party democracy system as an unavoidable reality of American culture, creating a new two-party system, where the Syndicalists and the Farmer Labor Party become the two dominant parties within the state, each advocating for the interests of the industrial worker and the farmer alike. The Commonwealth of America would move forward together, spreading socialism to the world. But that's so boring! For several reasons, mostly revolving around how ludicrous it would be that the anarcho-syndicalists and totalists would allow for outright revisionists to incorporate themselves into the revolutionary movement. But what I want to focus on is that there's a lot of missed potential for a governmental system that could simultaneously grant the Commonwealth of America significant potential while laying the seeds for a conflict that could result in a natural collapse if mismanaged properly. Welcome to my take on KGB's America, which I'll call the Union of American Socialist Republics. Now, I can predict that even with the naming of the Commonwealth being transitioned to a USSR-style acronym, that there's going to be some level of contention. There's no doubt that syndicalism is far different than Leninism. and therefore the adoption of this name alone is going to sound extremely controversial and inaccurate. What I hope to convey with this name change is a distancing from the CSA's successor states as we know them in Kaiserreich to properly illustrate the sort of government form that this takes as compared to Kaiserreich's timeline. What I propose is that the Pacific states agree to unite with the CSA so long as they maintain their territorial integrity and keep their acquisition of British Columbia solely under their authority. This Pacific Autonomous Region would continue to operate functionally as it had been, but recognizes the government in Chicago as their overlord, and with hopes to gradually reform away from capitalism and avoid the bloodshed of yet another conflict. The Chicago Revolutionary Government would end up accepting this deal, as if they hadn't, the Pacific Navy would have defected away from the CSA and potentially would align themselves with Japan, eliminating any possibility of the Americans to begin exerting their influence in Southeast Asia. The establishment of the Pacific autonomy would be very controversial, but it had accidentally laid the groundwork for further stabilization and allow for other regions of non-Anglo-Saxon heritage to gain autonomies in this UASR. Quebec, a French island in an Anglo-Saxon pond, would eagerly seek autonomous status within the UASR. While anarcho-syndicalist theory dictates that the boundaries of former religion and language would not matter in the face of a socialist state, as all workers are workers despite their culture, the Quebecois Autonomous Region would be a requirement for Quebec to ever have any hopes of being incorporated into this Anglo-dominated state. Quebec had already faced enough oppression when they were accompanied by several other Anglo provinces. Now, the UASR was seeking to incorporate them directly as a state, with no special autonomies. If anarcho-syndicalist ideology was applied indiscriminately, Quebec would become a breeding ground for Catholic integralists and other reactionary groups, who would eagerly collaborate with the Germans in the destruction of the workers' state. Releasing Quebec as a puppet state would allow for the Quebecois government to potentially proclaim independence and side with Germany. Therefore, the Chicago government would create the Quebecois Autonomous Zone. With the Pacific and Quebecois autonomy, the Chicago government would be forced to provide an autonomous republic to the African Americans of the Black Belt. An autonomous Black Belt was an ambition and a campaign promise of Foster, a communist in our history and a totalist in Kaiserreich's timeline. While totalism might not be in power in KGB's timeline, totalism as an ideological concept would not have been defeated. While it may have been disenfranchised, their promises of an African American autonomy would embolden local movements to advocate for such an autonomy, especially seeing as the Pacific and Quebecois were granted autonomy already. Therefore, the Chicago government would have no choice but to grant the Black Belt autonomy. Last but not least, the Native Americans, especially those who had been oppressed by the Canadians, would desperately seek autonomy in order to preserve their way of life in their ancestral lands. Seeing nothing to lose, the Chicago government would grant the former Canadian territories autonomy, as well as observer rights to ensure that the Native communities across the entire Union were treated equally. After the continuous propping up of autonomies across America, the UASR had ended up with these administrative divisions, with the Chicago government due to be titled the Central Region, controlling the remaining Anglo-Saxon regions of both the USA and Canada, besides the Pacific autonomy. On first glance, this seems like an incredibly weak position, rather than the preferred outcome of total federal dominance. However, there are significant advantages to this outcome. Much like the USSR had in our history, these autonomous governments would all have representatives that would convene in the capital of the Union, where they would all have a say in the operations of the Union by collective leadership. In my canon, while the remaining Central American Anglo-Saxon territories would have their capital in Chicago, the 5 autonomous republics would convene in D.C., where the chairman of the Union would meet with the presidents of each autonomy to determine foreign and domestic policy. This strange mix of American and USSR styles of government would allow for easy expansion of the Union. For example, the East Indies Federation had fallen to a syndicalist revolution. In KGB's original outline, they were a member of the Third International, but were an ally of the Commonwealth of America. But in the LoreDad version, we're in a situation where the East Indies Federation can easily apply for membership of the UASR, expanding the UASR, but not requiring any interference from the local government. This could, with enough time and diplomacy, could be spread to the remaining American socialist governments, laying the path for a united socialist America, to be able to fight against the capitalists of the world. While the groundwork for a true superpower had been laid, there remains a farcical problem, as one of these autonomies is not like the other. Despite the sprawling UASR and their dominance over America, the Pacific autonomy is seen by all socialists as a fifth column, waiting for their opportunity to destroy the Union. As if the Pacific autonomy ever were to elect an overtly non-socialist to leadership, the potential for them to immediately secede from the Union could lead to others within the autonomies of the Union to demand the same thing, and ultimately lead to the UASR's collapse. This potential Pacific secession would be the Japanese and Germans' primary way of attempting to destabilize the UASR, as they would find ways to covertly support the Democrats and Republicans, who would unite in a coalition against the Farmer-Labor Syndicalist United Front, who would have bound together in response to the capitalists' coalition. This would lead to a very strange dynamic taking place in the Pacific states, as syndicalists within the Central American region would migrate en masse to the Pacific states, banding together to support the Socialist Party there, therefore limiting the possibility of the Pacific autonomy continuing to exist. This dynamic had even occurred in our history, as while the territories of the West were contested between pro- and anti-slavery settlers, who had hoped to reach a majority in the to-be-founded states in order to advance their agendas. This second Wild West would be a major feature in UASR and Pacific autonomy gameplay. With the UASR, the Pacific autonomy would fight a slow war of independence and propaganda until the Pacific states either declare independence or be subsumed into the new order. On top of fighting for influence in the Pacific autonomy and attempting to subsume the Democratic-Republican coalition, the UASR is faced with the fact that totalists within the Union would be extremely disgruntled. The totalists would be extremely hostile to the Pacific autonomy on ideological grounds, and see any attempts to slowly subsume them into the Central American region as misguided and dangerous. In their mind, the longer the Pacific autonomy lasts peacefully within the Union, the more influence the Pacific revisionists will have on the Union itself, ultimately subverting the Union away from socialism. This would be the primary motivation of the totalist faction within the UASR, as party members would be split between gradual reform and violent suppression. If the UASR's current syndicalist government were ever to fall in the hands of a totalist, the UASR would declare war on the Pacific states with hopes to annex the territory and incorporate it directly. This fragile but potentially extremely powerful governmental system would be the primary peacetime gameplay element of the UASR, and if the player mismanages the governments of the autonomies or leadership of the UASR falls to totalists, the collapse of the UASR is extremely likely, granting the Japanese and Germans the capability to capitalize on the chaos. If the Pacific states are able to resist long enough, the potential for a complete collapse of syndicalism in America is possible, with either the West holding on despite insurrections, or a complete collapse to partisans and independence movements. While it would be safe to assume that the Pacific states would just reclaim the USA, the administrative legacy of the Central region and hostility between East and West would leave America permanently divided, with the potential of a Central American successor government falling to an authoritarian oligarchic capitalist government with aims to reconquer their lost territories. This collapse of socialist Americans has the potential to escalate far beyond the continent and give an opportunity for the Third World War to begin, and potentially the end of life on Earth. But if escalation is avoided and the socialist cause in America falls, there's still a Cold War to fight, as the Pacific states would be aligned with Japan, while the Eastern American states would be aligned with Germany. Japan would be the weakest of the three factions of this alternate Cold War, but would have significant potential. If the Japanese managed to hold on to liberal democracy, they would be able to use their ideology as a weapon against the German faction's colonies in Southeast Asia. Japan would, in this scenario, much like our timeline and Kaiserreich's timeline, seek to oust the Europeans out of the Pacific and create a co-prosperity sphere. This scenario is unique in that the Fengtian government manages to proclaim a Chinese government under direct alignment with Japan, leaving the potential for a China united under Japanese influence. Japan's ambitions would be resisted by many, and would gain the support from the Germans and Americans alike, as the Germans attempt to establish collaboration governments in the wake of anti-colonial unrest, and the Americans seek to strengthen the socialists of these movements in order to gain a foothold in the region and contain the Japanese. Japan would seek to counter the American socialists by supporting the Democratic Republican coalition in the Pacific states, with the goal of establishing them as a buffer state between themselves and the socialists, and allow them to expand their Asian-centered alliance into the Americas, with the potential for a Pacific-based order to be established. And then there's the German Empire. Somehow, I managed to go a full video on this scenario without talking about its poster boy, the Greater German Kaiserreich, that utterly dominates Europe. Every Kaiserboo's wet dream. The reason why I haven't brought him up is because I generally don't like Europe in this scenario, or how big Germany is. If I had more time, I would attempt to revise Europe somehow, make the sphere of influence that Germany exerts onto Europe somehow limited, or limit their influence to only Europe and Africa, with Africa being due to become a hotbed of conflicts between liberals supported by Japan and socialists supported by the Americans. Regardless, I don't have much input into how Europe can be improved. Maybe it's fine the way it is, but I don't have enough information to guarantee anything. What I do think has a lot of potential to be interesting is the Ottoman Empire. Despite being touted the sick man of Europe, the Ottomans had managed to survive 2 world wars. As the caliph of all Sunni and the custodian of the holy cities, the influence that the Ottomans can exert onto the Islamic world is immense, but due to their instability, the potential for them to become a superpower is unlikely. I see the Ottomans having a similar dynamic as the Italians do in TNO, a minor power who seeks to join a greater faction, with the Americans and Japanese vying for their alignment. In this case, it would be between Germany and Japan. Would the Germans be able to make enough concessions to the Ottomans? Or would the Ottomans rather keep their distance and align themselves with the distant but far more amicable Japan? Or did they manage to strike a balance between both powers and become the primary nation of the non-aligned movement? Regardless of outcome, the potential for the Ottomans to remain stable and a player in the Cold War is possible, unless of course the scorned Germans or Japanese support insurgencies or sponsor coups against their rule. Hey all, we're going to do some more unscripted stuff. I've been streaming the creation of the maps for this video, and if you guys like those streams, let me know, because it's been pretty fun getting people's input. Wasn't able to integrate all of them into the video, but I wanted to shout out all the people who gave suggestions nonetheless. Yeah, the more I worked on this, the more I realized how many things were just done for Germany's favor for the sake of making Germany really big, like this realization I had where, well, you'll see. They have the Ottomans winning, but they don't have them taking all that eastern land off of Persia? What? Oh, I know why. It's because they want to give Azerbaijan oil. Oh. German oil to the fucking... Oh my god, Kagero. Jesus. Yeah, so of course, like, Azerbaijan remains Azerbaijan and Reichspakt and oil. Like, the lore has just been made to support Germany as much as possible. If I would make changes here, I'd do something like the Ottomans get all their eastern territories and they get Azerbaijan as a puppet like they were supposed to in the first peace deal before Germany cut it out. Maybe there's tensions regarding Ottomans in Germany there. They had to make the concessions for the Ottomans to actually stay German aligned before they potentially go over to Japan. I left most of everything blank. I had initially a section for Russia where I was trying to determine what they'd be, but the problem is that Russia is like so big and obviously going to be a threat to any German order, so then you have to like give all of Russia to Germany, but you can't do that. So then it's like, okay, are we going to split Russia down the middle, kind of like Project Stressa does? But then that's a little too much. What I'm trying to get at is there are reasons why mods like this die. It's because the fundamental aspects of the mod are incompatible. So if people were to start a new mod, take the concept of a Japanese versus American Cold War, and if you want to keep the German Empire victory, you could do that too, but make it so Japan has all of the Pacific. Don't give Germany their Southeast Asian territories or the Netherlands. That way Japan has enough resources between itself to be able to actually contest the European hegemon or the American hegemon. Well, that was certainly a lot of fun. Yet again, I managed to overextend myself and make a long video about what I thought was supposed to be a short project. I hope you've enjoyed my ideas for the vision of this dead mod, and I implore any interested in reviving this concept to do so. I'll open up a channel on my Discord where all interested parties can talk together and potentially make their own server. The link to my Discord is in the description. Thanks for watching my video, and being patient with me as I work on my secret project and German October. Once I've spent enough time cooking, we could have a great start to the second year of the channel. Any ideas on what we can do to celebrate? Leave ideas in the comments. Shout out to Enzo Rafael Souza Silva, Louis Avant, Grud, Kaiser Gaming, Jubs, and Solo Leo for being channel members. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to have your name shouted out at the end of my video, please consider supporting the channel by getting a membership. If you're ever part of a socialist party, be sure to avoid any inter-party purges. Anyway, I hope you all have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Please subscribe. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.